On November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, Portland International Airport looked completely ordinary. Travelers moved through the terminal, carrying small suitcases, excited to visit family for the holiday. The weather outside was gray and rainy, typical for the Pacific Northwest. Among the travelers that afternoon was a quiet man in his mid-40s. He wore a dark suit, a white shirt, and a thin black tie. His hair was neatly combed. He carried a simple briefcase. Nothing about him looked unusual. But within a few hours, he would commit one of the most mysterious crimes in American history. The man approached the ticket counter of Northwest Orient Airlines. He calmly purchased a one-way ticket from Portland to Seattle. The flight was short, only about 30 minutes in the air. When the ticket agent asked for his name, he gave a simple answer. Dan Cooper. The ticket cost $20. He paid in cash. A short time later, Cooper boarded Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 305. The aircraft was a Boeing 727, a popular airplane at the time. There were 36 passengers on board that afternoon. Most of them were business travelers heading home before Thanksgiving. No one paid much attention to the quiet man in the dark suit. He chose a seat near the back of the aircraft. He ordered a drink, bourbon and soda. At 2:50 p.m., the plane lifted off from the runway and began its short flight toward Seattle. The passengers relaxed in their seats. Some looked out the windows at the gray clouds. Others opened newspapers or magazines. Everything felt calm, routine, completely normal. But only a few minutes after takeoff, something unexpected happened. A flight attendant named Florence Schaffner was walking through the cabin when Cooper handed her a folded piece of paper. At first, she assumed it was a phone number. That sometimes happened during flights. Passengers occasionally gave notes to flight attendants, so she placed the paper in her pocket without reading it. But Cooper quietly leaned toward her and spoke. His voice was calm, almost polite. "Miss," he said softly, "you should read that note. I have a bomb." Florence slowly unfolded the paper. The message was short and very clear. It demanded $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. Then Cooper calmly opened his briefcase. Inside were red cylinders, wires, and a battery. To the flight attendant, it looked exactly like explosives. The crew quietly informed the pilots. The pilots contacted air traffic control. Within minutes, the FBI was alerted. But while authorities rushed to respond, Cooper remained perfectly calm. He leaned back in his seat, sipped his bourbon, and waited. As Northwest Orient Flight 305 approached Seattle, the situation inside the aircraft remained strangely calm. Most of the passengers had no idea what was happening. They simply believed the plane had been delayed for technical reasons. Only the flight crew knew the truth. Somewhere in the back of the plane sat a man with a briefcase that appeared to contain explosives, and he was demanding $200,000. The pilots followed Cooper's instructions carefully. They circled the plane above Seattle while authorities prepared the ransom. On the ground, the FBI began assembling the money. $200,000, all in $20 bills. Agents quickly photographed the serial numbers of each bill. They hoped that if Cooper escaped, the marked money might eventually help identify him. The FBI had very little time. They knew that Cooper had threatened to detonate the bomb if his demands were not met. So the agents moved quickly. Within a short time, they gathered the money and packed it into a bag. At the same time, they collected 4 parachutes from a nearby skydiving school. Everything Cooper had requested. At 5:46 p.m., The plane finally landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Rain continued to fall across the runway. The aircraft rolled slowly to a remote area of the airport, far from the terminal. Police vehicles and FBI agents waited in the distance. Following Cooper's instructions, the authorities approached the aircraft carefully. They delivered the bag containing the ransom money. They also handed over the parachutes. Inside the cabin, Cooper watched calmly. He checked the equipment. Then he nodded. Once Cooper confirmed that his demands had been met, he allowed the passengers to leave. One by one, the 36 passengers stepped off the aircraft. Many of them still had no idea that they had been part of a hijacking. They simply believed the flight had experienced a delay. But Cooper was not finished. He ordered the remaining flight crew back into the aircraft. Only a few people stayed on board now. The pilot, the co-pilot, the flight engineer, and one flight attendant. Witnesses later described Cooper as calm and polite during the entire event. He did not shout. He did not panic. He spoke clearly and confidently. At one point, he even reassured the flight attendant that everything would be fine. While the plane refueled, Cooper explained his next instructions. He wanted the aircraft to fly toward Mexico, but he had very specific conditions. The plane had to fly slowly, at a low altitude, with the landing gear partially lowered. At 7:40 p.m., the aircraft took off once again. This time, there were only a few people on board, and somewhere in the back of the plane sat a man carrying $200,000. Outside the window, night had fallen. The plane disappeared into the dark sky above the Pacific Northwest. And soon, something incredible would happen. As the Boeing 727 continued its flight into the night, the atmosphere inside the plane was quiet and tense. Only 4 crew members remained on board. Somewhere behind them, in the rear section of the aircraft, sat a man with a briefcase, a bag of ransom money, and 2 parachutes. Outside the windows, the sky had turned completely dark. Rain fell across the mountains and forests below. The pilots carefully followed Cooper's instructions. The plane was flying at a low altitude, around 10,000 feet. The speed was slow. The landing gear remained partially lowered. These unusual conditions made the flight more difficult for the crew, but they obeyed every instruction. They knew the man behind them claimed to have a bomb. At one point, Cooper called the flight attendant back to the rear of the plane. Her name was Tina Mucklow. Later, she would describe the hijacker as calm, polite, and very controlled. He did not behave like someone panicking. In fact, he seemed surprisingly relaxed. Cooper carefully examined the parachutes. He selected one for himself. Then he began attaching the bag of money to his body using parachute cords. The bag contained $200,000. It weighed almost 25 pounds. After preparing the parachute, Cooper gave the flight attendant one final instruction. He told her to go to the cockpit and stay there. She hesitated for a moment, but Cooper calmly repeated the request. When Tina reached the cockpit, she closed the door behind her. The pilots remained focused on flying the aircraft through the stormy night. None of them could see what Cooper was doing in the back of the plane, but they knew something important was about to happen. The Boeing 727 had a unique feature. At the back of the aircraft, a staircase could be lowered while the plane was still in the air. Investigators later believed that Cooper used this staircase to prepare for his escape. Outside, the weather was becoming more difficult. Heavy rain fell across the mountains. Strong winds moved through the clouds. Below the aircraft stretched miles of dark forests and rugged terrain. Then, at approximately 8:13 p.m., something unusual happened. The pilots felt a sudden change in the aircraft's movement. It was brief, but noticeable. Later investigators would come to a shocking conclusion. They believed that this moment was when D.B. Cooper jumped from the aircraft into the cold November night, carrying $200,000. And then he disappeared. Inside the cockpit, the crew of Flight 305 continued flying through the dark sky. They had no idea exactly what had happened in the back of the aircraft, but they suspected the hijacker had made his move. The pilots continued the flight toward Reno, Nevada, where they had been instructed to land. At approximately 10:15 p.m., the Boeing 727 landed safely in Reno. Police cars and FBI agents surrounded the aircraft immediately. Officers carefully approached the plane. They knew the hijacker had claimed to be carrying a bomb. When the agents entered the cabin, they quickly realized something surprising. The hijacker was gone. The rear staircase of the aircraft was partially lowered. 2 parachutes remained inside the plane, but the bag containing the ransom money was missing. Investigators searched the aircraft carefully. They discovered several small clues. A black clip-on tie left behind on one of the seats, a few cigarette butts in the ashtray, and the note that had originally been given to the flight attendant. But the hijacker himself had vanished. Within hours, a massive search operation began. Helicopters flew over the forests of Washington state. Search teams moved through mountains and rivers. Investigators believed Cooper had jumped somewhere over the dense wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. But the terrain below was extremely difficult. Miles of thick forests, cold rivers, steep mountains, and on that night, heavy rain and strong winds had covered the region. If Cooper had survived the jump, finding him would be incredibly difficult. The FBI began analyzing the flight path of the aircraft. They tried to calculate exactly where Cooper might have landed. Based on wind speed, altitude, and time, investigators estimated a large search area near the border of Washington and Oregon. Search teams spent weeks combing through the wilderness. They searched forests, riverbanks, and mountain slopes, but they found no parachute, no money, and no sign of the mysterious hijacker. As the days passed, the story captured the attention of the entire country. Newspapers across America reported on the strange crime. Who was D.B. Cooper? And how had he vanished without leaving a trace? Many investigators began to suspect something troubling. Perhaps Cooper had not survived the jump. The weather had been freezing. The terrain was dangerous, and he had jumped at night into an unfamiliar wilderness, but without a body. No one could be sure. Years passed after the mysterious hijacking of Northwest Orient Flight 305. The FBI continued searching for answers. Investigators followed hundreds of leads. Thousands of suspects were examined, but none of them could be definitively linked to the mysterious man known as D.B. Cooper. The case became one of the longest investigations in FBI history. Agents studied fingerprints, analyzed handwriting, and examined every piece of evidence left on the aircraft. But the identity of the hijacker remained unknown. Then, nearly 9 years after the hijacking, something unexpected happened. In February of 1980, a young boy named Brian Ingram was camping with his family near the Columbia River in Washington state. While digging in the sand along the riverbank, he noticed something unusual buried beneath the surface. It was money, old damaged bundles of $20 bills. When investigators examined the serial numbers, they discovered something shocking. The bills matched the ransom money given to D.B. Cooper. The discovery confirmed that at least part of the ransom money had somehow ended up along the river. But it raised even more questions. How did the money get there? Did Cooper land nearby, Or had the money been carried by the river over time? Despite decades of investigation, no other significant evidence was ever found. No parachute, no equipment, no body, and no confirmed identity. Some investigators believe Cooper did not survive the jump. The weather conditions that night were extremely dangerous. Freezing temperatures, heavy rain, strong winds. Others believe something very different. They believe Cooper was an experienced skydiver, someone who carefully planned every detail of the crime. If that theory is true, Cooper may have landed safely somewhere in the wilderness, disappearing quietly into the night and beginning a completely new life. More than 50 years later, the mystery remains unsolved. The man known as D.B. Cooper was never identified, and the rest of the ransom money was never recovered. To this day, D.B. Cooper remains the only airplane hijacker in United States history who was never caught.